So, Trevor, let's talk about Notre Dame's next opponent, the Virginia Cavaliers, because from you and I's discussion before the show, we're kind of on the same page about this Virginia team. But let's give a little bit of a quick rundown of who the Cavaliers are. Virginia is 5-4 on the season and started the season off relatively well. Trevor, they were a surprising 4-1 football team. Had wins over a 34-13 win over Richmond. They went on the road, beat Wake Forest by a point. Lost to Maryland at home. That was probably the worst loss they've had all year, in that you lost to that team, a game they should have won. Then they went on the road and blew out Coastal Carolina, beat Boston College at home by 10 in a comeback game, by the way. I believe BC had an early lead in that game. Had a really hard-fought loss to Louisville. Louisville jumped up on them 17-7. Virginia rallied back, took a 20-17 lead, made a big fourth quarter stop that you thought was going to be kind of the end of the game. Couldn't make enough stop, or couldn't do enough on offense to really milk the game out. Louisville goes down and scores in the final couple minutes of the game to win that one 24-20. So very, very good win in that regard for Louisville, who was really struggling at the time, Trevor. I mean, they were coming off of back-to-back losses over Notre Dame and SMU, and were reeling a little bit and needed that win to kind of somewhat right the ship a little bit. And it's turned out to be huge because they lost a week later to Miami. But now, instead of being losers of 3-4, which they were, now they're winners of 3-4. And of course, that Virginia game was part of that. So hard-fought loss for Virginia. Next couple games, Trev, not so hard fought. They got blown out by Clemson, 48-31. And as you and I pointed out, it was not that close of a game. It really wasn't. It was a blowout. I mean, I think Virginia scored 21 points in the fourth quarter. It was 38-10 at the end of it was actually, I should say, it was a competitive game in the first half. Virginia actually had a 10-3 second half lead. Clemson scored the last two touchdowns of the half to go up 17-10. And then third quarter is when Clemson just steamrolled them and put three touchdown drives together, Virginia, to make it 38-10. So it went from 17-10 at halftime to 38-10 going into the fourth quarter. Virginia scored. Clemson came down and made it 41-17. Virginia scored to make it 41-25. Clemson scored to make it 48-25. And then Virginia scored to make it 48-31. It really wasn't a close game in the second half. And then the North Carolina game was the one game that they were truly just dominated for four quarters. They were down 24-6 at halftime against North Carolina. The Tar Heels had two touchdowns in the third quarter, including a pick six. And then Virginia scored early in the fourth quarter. Clemson and then North Carolina kicked the field goal, and that was the final scoring to win 41-14. And it looked like Virginia was reeling. It really did. They had a bye week, and Tony Elliott did a great job getting his team back on track during that bye. I mean, they were reeling. They looked bad in losses to North Carolina and Pitt, Trev. Clemson, they look bad. They come out of the break and they go to Pitt, they go on the road, and they beat a top 25 Pitt team. And a game where they had to come back. Pitt actually had a lead. I think Pitt was up 13-7 early in the game, and then Virginia rallied back and ultimately won that game. I think they took a lead. I'm about to pull up the box. I thought they took a lead from watching. They took a lead, and then Pitt took it back, and then Virginia won. I'm going to just pull up the box score here real quick. Yes. No, Pitt made it closer. So Pitt was up 13-7 at halftime. Virginia scored twice, with help from Pitt, because Pitt just really struggled. Scored two touchdowns in the third quarter. Pitt scored to make it 21-19, went for two, didn't get it, and then Virginia put it away with 2 minutes left, kicking the field goal for the final outcome by 24-19. So much needed win. So instead of 4-5 and losers of three straight, they're now 5-4 and coming off of a road upset over a ranked team. I'm sure no one was happier about that than Marcus Freeman, because he's like, well, this is going to make it a lot easier to sell that this week, because you know what I mean? I'll say this just big picture, Trevor, and I'll kick it to you. This is not a super talented football team. We're not going to try to convince you that it is. But the one thing Ryan and I commented a lot last year was Virginia was not good, but they played hard for Tony Elliott. This year, they are the same exact way. They're just more talented than they were last year in certain spots. But this is a team that is coached relatively well. They're sound. They don't beat themselves a whole lot. but they're a physical team that doesn't quit. I mean, even the North Carolina game, I'm watching the second half, and like they're just getting their butts kicked, but they're not quitting. They're battling. And you got to give Tony Elliott a lot of credit. He had that team was on the verge of just becoming a joke in the ACC. And he has really done a good job of kind of, finishing well last year, not with wins and stuff, because they were not a very good team last year, but just being competitive, Trevor. That's really the big thing. I mean, they had a couple blowouts late, but they only lost to Miami by 3 last year on the road. They only lost to a ranked Louisville team by a touchdown. They upset Duke late in the year. They beat North Carolina on the road. They only lost to BC by 3. They only lost to NC State by 3. They lost to James Madison by a point. Like, they competed, they battled. And then coming in this year, they've been able to kind of turn the corner a little bit. And now they have 3 tough games at Notre Dame, home against SMU, at Virginia Tech to end the season. They just got to win one of them to be in a bowl game. That's not going to be easy. But this is a team that, outside of a couple players, and we'll get into the specifics of the players, it's not a super talented team, but this is a physical team that is going to make you work. And they're a relatively disciplined and well-coached football team that Notre Dame is going to have to be prepared for. And you got to give credit to Tony Elliott for getting this team to where they are after how things started in his tenure.
Yeah, you and I were talking before the show about Virginia's issue is just the talent gap when they go up against that next tier of college football teams. They remind me a lot of Stanford in that, there's a big athletic gap, but they're going to play you hard for 4 quarters. And teams like that are able to pull off upsets, right? We saw it last week because they feast on other teams' mistakes, which, if you want to know why Brian and I were talking so heavily on offensive efficiency, and you want to talk about, why Notre Dame needs to build a full 4-quarter game and using that Navy game as a benchmark of how they need to perform, it's teams like Virginia that are why. Now, I do firmly believe that Notre Dame does not have to play their A game to beat Virginia. It's not one of those, right? But what did we talk about? We talked about perspective and the scope of how people look at Notre Dame. And if they don't come prepared, ready to play, this could be a 28-17 type of game. This could be a 31-20 type game. It's just a game that is so much closer than what it needs to be if Notre Dame doesn't come ready, prepared to play. A gritty football team. I think that's a really good word to describe Virginia. They're not going to do anything athletically outside of a couple of positions that are going to blow you away, right? There's not really a whole lot of people on offense where you look at them and say, yo, like this guy could blow this thing open if Notre Dame doesn't. No, it's nothing like that. But if you don't come ready to play your standard of football, Virginia's a team that's just going to hang around, man. They do a really good job at hanging around because they're very physical, they're disciplined, and they love to play for their head coach, who, after back-to-back seasons of 3-win seasons, he's having his best season by far and is already at 5 games with 3 games left to play. So I like Tony Elliott. I like what he's done to turn around Virginia a little bit, and hopefully he can keep building there. Just not at the sacrifice of doing it to Notre Dame. So, yeah, but this Virginia team will play you tough for 4 quarters. They will.
So let's talk about the Virginia offense, Trevor. Obviously, this side of the ball they have a couple decent players. We'll kind of go over just some of the overall production here as we kind of break this team down. But when you look at what excuse me, what they are on this side of the ball, it really comes down to you have to make sure that they have to work for everything they get. That's really the big thing. You have to make them work for everything that they get because they're not a very dynamic team. They're not a real good big play offense. You look at the numbers. You put these up in an article you have out today, Notre Dame opponent preview. Trevor, offensively, they rank 81st in the country in scoring at 26 points per game. They're 60th in yards, 72nd in yards per play, 86th in rushing yards, 91st in yards per rush. They are 39th in passing yards. They've trailed a lot, but they're 52nd in yards per attempt, only 72nd in yards per completion. They rank 102nd in sacks in tackles for loss allowed and 127th in sacks allowed, partly because of you and I were going through the numbers. The last 3 games, they've given up 20 sacks in the last 3 games alone. You look at some of their other numbers, Trevor, third down offense, they rank 109th. Their red zone offense, they rank 98th in the country in red zone offense. There's just nothing really endearing about this team when you look at their production on offense. There's some players that I like, and we'll get into those here in a second. But they're just honestly, they're not a very good team. And you put in your breakdown, you put their overall red zone offense, which is 98th, but it's actually even worse than that, Trevor, because they're 132nd in red zone touchdown offense. So even ranking as low as you had them, and you put in the correct number. I'm not saying your numbers were incorrect. I'm saying it's worse than even the number that I have, because I told you you're putting in what I told you to put it. So I'm not blaming you for that. I'm saying when you look even further beyond just the overall red zone numbers, you realize that a lot of their scores are field goals because they can't put the ball in the end zone. And so on paper, it's a really rough matchup against a Notre Dame team that's one of the best defenses in the country. But the Irish defense is going to have to be on top of its game, because they let a Florida State offense that's even worse kind of move the ball down the field a couple times early in the first half last week. So they're going to have to be on top of their game. But just big picture, this is not a great offense, even though there's a couple guys that concern us, and we'll talk about those here in a second. But they're going to need either a lot of Notre Dame turnovers, or they're just going to have to play their best game of the season to really be able to score enough on this Notre Dame team to pull off the upset. And that side of the ball is really the big reason why I don't worry about losing this game. It's more so about you just don't want them to have a sloppy win that people can look at and say, see, 5-5, Virginia team, and you guys, Now, Indiana beats a 5-4 Michigan team, and they move up 4 spots in the AP poll. But if Notre Dame beats a 5-5 Virginia team, they're going to fall down. Or if it's a close game, that's just the reality of it. So this side of the ball is the one where you've got to make sure they don't play beyond where they are and make this game a lot closer.
Yeah, I agree. Virginia just doesn't have the horses on offense to compete. Like, unfortunately, they have a couple of guys that are pretty decent. They do. And I know we're going to dive into those in a second. A lot of their issues lie up front on the offensive line. They do not do a good job of protecting the quarterback. Like you had touched on, they've given up 31 sacks in 9 games, which ranks at the bottom of college football. I think that puts them at 127th in the country. So, and again, rushing, they don't do a great job at opening up rushing lanes. I don't remember which game it is, but I think I saw that Virginia in one of their games as a team had 7 yards rushing. So it's just their offensive line kind of handicaps them a little bit. Quarterback play hasn't been great. Their starting quarterback has 12 passing touchdowns and 8 interceptions. So he's one of those guys that when he does get pressured, and it's quite often, he will turn the ball over. But Virginia is just a team that, like we said before, they're just good enough to hang around because they're gritty. They'll play you hard for 4 quarters, which is why Notre Dame has to be extremely efficient with what they do on defense. Florida State had no business starting that game going on a 16-play, 75-yard drive. Just didn't. So, spoiler alert, a key victory of mine on Thursday is start fast for both the offense and the defense, because you could make the argument that the offense has done a better job in this 4-game stretch of starting fast. Better than the defense has. So it can't be one of those things where you allow a team like Virginia to walk into South Bend, a place where you've already been upset this year, and kind of get that mentality of, we could kind of do this. We can kind of hang with these guys. Because you saw that a little bit on Saturday with Florida State. You saw that a little bit after Florida State went on that offensive drive. Their defense was like, can we hang around? And then quickly, Notre Dame shut the door on that relatively quickly. But you just don't want a team like that we talked all last week about how Florida State kind of gets hit in the mouth a little bit and they kind of quit. I don't see that out of this Virginia team. I don't. So you just don't want it to be closer than what it is, because again, it's all about the scope. IU can go on a 10-game win streak of not playing a single team that has 6 wins yet, and they can beat a 5-4 Michigan team by 5 points, and it's fantastic because the mindset is, they're IU, and Notre Dame could do the same thing, and they will drop them in the rankings. There's no doubt in my mind about it.
Right. So, Trev, offensively, they don't do anything that's overly earth-shattering. They're a spread team. honestly, they don't look a whole lot different than what Tony Elliott likes to do, right? I mean, at Clemson, when he was the OC for those really good Clemson teams, it's a spread offense. They'll spread the ball around relatively well, run a lot of inside zone, mix up their runs. They'll run a lot of read zone. Matter of fact, like that's one of the biggest things I'm concerned about in this game is Michael Calandria being able to make some, or Anthony, Calandria, being able to make some plays with his legs. And that was really their offense in the first 2 quarters against Louisville. It's just him pulling on the backside of read zone and just taking it out the back gate. I mean, that's where they got a lot of their big chunk runs in the first half. He's a kid that can scramble a little bit. When you look at the production this season from them offensively, Trev, and you have this in your breakdown, Kobe Pace is their lead back. He's got 442 yards in the season, 4.4 yards per carry. He's got 32 more carries than Xavier Brown, who has 436 yards, 6.4 per carry. He's the guy that actually concerns me on their offense from a running back standpoint. He's only got 8 fewer yards than Pace, but he's got 32 fewer carries than Pace. And he had actually he sparked that off. He gave the offense that big play they needed to kind of get back in that Louisville game on that little wheel route he had out of the backfield, catches it wide open, beats a blitz. It was a really nice call. And then he made a guy miss in space and then housed it. That was a big play for them in that game. And he's the guy he's got some shiftiness to him. Trevor, you were talking about this with me when we were on the phone. He's got some shiftiness to him, and he's actually got speed where Kobe Pace is more of like a bigger kind of a physical back. For them, Kobe Pace is 5'10", 215. I believe that Brown was injured last year. I don't think he played a lot last year. Yeah, he didn't play at all last season. So I believe he was injured last year. But he's a big play weapon for them. That concerns you a little bit. Calandria out of the back. I mean, think about this, Trev. Anthony Calandria has 259 rushing yards in the season, which doesn't like strike a lot of fear in your heart, right? I mean, it's like, 259 yards, that's it. Well, what are you guys talking about? You're worried about him. All right, guys, they've given up 30 sacks for 193 minus yards. A lot of those were because of on Anthony Calandria. You take away the sack yards, this kid's over 400 rushing yards. Again, he's not Riley Leonard, he's not Jalen Milroe, but he can hurt you. He can be a chain mover. And that's the thing you've got to avoid. And at times this season, we saw it a little bit with Florida State, a couple times early in the game. We saw it with Connor Wegman in the opener, where a couple times they kind of let him tuck it up and move the chains with his legs. He can do that, and that's what you got to hope to avoid. The pass game weapon that I really like, Trevor, it's just that they haven't been able to really get the production out of him that he's capable of. If he played in a different offense, there'd be a lot more conversation about Malachi Fields, in my opinion. Not a burner, but he's 6'4", 220, physical pass catcher, good hands, solid route runner. He's a very good football player. Leads their team in receiving yards this year, Trev, with 45 catches. The next closest is 27. He's got 665 yards. The next closest is 325. And he's got 4 of their 15 touchdown receptions on the season. And he's had some big moments. He went for over 100 against Louisville, 9 for 129. He had 11 for 148 against Wake Forest. Last season, he had 58 catches for 811 yards and 5 touchdowns. So this is a kid that's got some ability. He's got some potential, Trevor. And what's crazy about his numbers last year, 58 for 811, he didn't have a single game of 90 yards or more last season and still put up those kind of numbers. This year, in 9 games, he actually has 3 100-yard games, 45 catches for 665 yards. He's the one guy you say, and with his size and strength going against, Notre Dame's got good length at corner, but they're young. You worry about, could they hit a couple back shoulder throws and some things like that? That's the concern with that matchup. But he's really the guy you look at and say, to me, it's Anthony Calandria's running ability. It's and some of his playmaking ability. It's Xavier Brown ripping off a big run, and it's Malachi Fields kind of playing at his A game. That's the 3 guys that you really look at that you have to be focused on, not concerned about, but focused on if you're the Notre Dame defense. Don't let those 3 guys beat you. And I'm also very curious if they have any kind of Chris Tyree type of packages this week. He's been banged up all year. He hasn't been a big part of their offense. He was back returning kicks and playing a little bit against Pitt. I think he had 4 catches against Pitt. You have to think they're going to try to do something. But personnel-wise, those are really the 3 guys that you look at and say, you've got to make sure those 3 guys don't take this game over. Because like a gimmick here, a gimmick there, and we'll talk about that here in a sec, Trev, that'll happen. But losing a game comes down to you can't stop Ontario Brown, right? I mean, that's what it came down to. It's not a play here, a play there. It's like he had a lot of plays, and that's what you can't allow Xavier Brown, Anthony Calandria, or Malachi Fields to do to you.
Malachi Fields is a solid receiver, man. He's a guy he's not going to burn you for a 75-yard touchdown. He's not that guy, but what makes him so dangerous in the offense, he has really strong hands. He's not afraid to catch over the middle of the field. He's really good on the sideline. And he's that receiver that can kind of eat you up for those 15 to 20-yard chunks at a time, right? And when I go through and I look, I mean, Notre Dame's corners, for good reason, have been like relatively untested the last 4 games. Like they haven't really had anybody that can test them that way. I mean, I know around Stanford, we talked a little bit about Alike Omener, but he really just didn't get the opportunity to go up and make many plays because the pass rush was so good. Ideally, that is kind of the same storyline, but I do believe that there will be a couple times throughout this game where the Notre Dame corners will be tested a little bit with Malachi Fields' size. I think that's going to be interesting. And Notre Dame's corners are still relatively inexperienced as well. I mean, Leonard Moore is going on his what will this be for him? His 4th start. He started the Louisville game and then started Georgia Tech, Navy, and Florida State. So Leonard Moore is going on his 4th start. Christian Gray is going on his like 8th or 9th, going back to did he start it all last year?
Christian Gray?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Okay. No, because he didn't start the bowl game either. But he played starter snaps against Pitt because Jaden Mickey started the game opposite Cam Hart when Benjamin Morrison was out. But then Cam went down like first half, and Christian stepped in and basically played starter snaps. And he played starter snaps against Oregon State, but I believe it was still Morrison and Mickey in the starting lineup.
Okay. Those were the 2 games that I couldn't remember if Christian Gray got the start or just came in and took the share of the snaps due to injury. So, excuse me. So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to be interested to see how they go against Malachi Fields because he is a senior and he has a lot of playing experience. So that's going to be an interesting matchup to watch. But again, you just can't let Xavier Brown rip you up for big chunks in the run game. Yep. Just can't. I know the scoreboard might not show it, because Notre Dame won 52-3, but Florida State's running backs were getting chunks at a time. I think, their backup running back, Singleton, he averaged close to 6-7 yards a carry in that game, and Toafili went for a good amount. So it just can't be one of those games where they get into a rhythm.
You hit on something there, Trevor. That's the concern in this matchup for Notre Dame, because we just listed off all those statistics that you had in your breakdown, right? I mean, 81st in scoring, 60th in offense, 86th in rushing yards, 39th in passing yards, 109th in third down offense, 98th in red zone offense. But here's the thing. They rank 36th in most plays of 40 yards or more. They've got more than Notre Dame does. You have 11 plays this season of 40 yards or more, which again is a good number. They rank 36 in most plays They rank 30. No, that's Virginia Tech. Sorry. They rank 53rd in most plays of 50 yards or more. Again, both numbers higher than all the other key statistics. The reason they rank so low in points and yards is because of the negatives. Well, Notre Dame hasn't been a great team at generating negatives, tackles for loss and sacks, although they're coming off of a game where they certainly did a lot of that. But they've been a pretty good big play offense. And I just talked about how it was that big play. They had a couple big plays against Louisville that really sparked their offense in that game. And that's what kind of got them there, because they're not a team that's going to consistently move the ball up and down the field, Trevor. And this is why what you were talking about is so important, is you can't allow them to chunk you to death, right? You can't. I mean, it just comes down to that, Trevor. You can't allow them to rip off 5-6 big plays. They either get them in a scoring position or even worse, result in touchdowns. You just can't do it, because when they start getting some of those big plays going, that's when they can make things a little bit more interesting. And as I said, we saw that against Louisville. They had a 46-yard touchdown from Xavier Brown, and Malachi Fields had a 28-yard gain. Cameron Courtney had a 27-yard gain. You had some chunk runs from Calandra. He had 3 or 4 runs of over 10 yards in that game, 84 yards on 15 carries in that game because Louisville wasn't able to get pressure on him. That's the thing. Louisville, I think, had 2 sacks in that game. That's it. They weren't able to get to him a whole lot, and so that allowed them to move the ball. And that's what Notre Dame can't allow them to do, Trevor. They can't allow them to have those big plays. If they do that, then this is a game that honestly they should dominate because all that we just described a 7-on-7 game, Trevor. It's an 11-on-11 game. And the reason that Virginia's offense struggles is because their offensive line is just not very good. It isn't. I mean, it just – I've tried to think of ways to kind of, hey, you know what, like they do that, but they're not. Here's the thing. They're tough kids. That's what you say about them. They compete. They play hard. They get after it. They're decent run blockers at times. But overall, Trevor, this is just not a very good offensive line. And they do have some size, I guess you could say that. They do have some size. They're 328, 318, 313, 300, 293. So they have some decent size at some spots. They do have some size at receiver with Malachi Fields. Their tight ends, decent size, 6'4", 248. But they're not very good. And they really struggle with any kind of quickness and athleticism. And that's certainly what Notre Dame is going to be throwing at them. And somebody just asked, whose O-line is better, Florida State or Virginia's? I'd probably say Florida State's. Virginia's plays harder. Florida State's is more talented. Is that fair? A fair comparison between the two?
Absolutely fair. Yeah. I mean, Florida State, and I know we're talking about Notre Dame's 8-sack performance against them, but Florida State's offensive line, when they want to, is definitely better than Virginia. I mean, from a talent perspective. Now, there is a factor of, well, are you that good of an offensive line if you don't try? I hear that. But from a pure talent and athletic perspective, it's Florida State's offensive line. Virginia's offensive line just kind of speaks for the rest of the team. They're gritty. They'll try hard for 4 quarters. But, they're just not, decent size, I guess. I mean, their right guard is 6'3", 293, so their size is fine. They just, when they go up against longer, more athletic, fast, quick defensive lines, they get eaten alive.
The one area that I'm a little concerned about, Trevor, to be honest with you, is at nose. Donovan Heinisch has to build on what he did last week because the one guy on their offensive line that I look at, I'm like, that's a pretty decent player is their center, Brian Stevens. And if you look at kind of his performances, it's not a shocker that their worst performance of the season in which they gave up 10 sacks was a game that he didn't play. He didn't play against North Carolina. It's not a shock because he really sets the entire – I mean, he's a really smart kid, very experienced kid, kind of sets the tone, kind of gets everybody where they need to get to. He's a good football. He's a quality guy. He reminds me a lot of Zeke Correll when Zeke's healthy. You know what I mean? And Zeke's having a great year at NC State, by the way. If anybody hasn't paid attention, Zeke's having a heck of a year at NC State. But, where he's not the biggest, not the most athletic, decent, because Zeke was never the athlete he was in high school because of all the injuries he had at Notre Dame. So he had to put some weight on. This is a scrappy kid, smart kid, battles. And then, of course, the game that they don't have him at center, they're just terrible. That's not it's not a coincidence, Trevor, that was the case. He's just that's kind of who they are, and he's the glue for that offensive line. I mean, here's what they've done in every game he's played in rushing wise: 273, 123, 384, 121, 148, 68, 170. Right? Not great, solid. The game he didn't play against North Carolina, whose defense is, let's be honest, not good. Run defense is okay. 7 yards. 7 yards. So, right, you know what I mean? He's back now. This is now his second game back. Their offensive line, they still gave up some pressures to Pitt, right? Because their offensive line's not good and Pitt's aggressive. But they looked better, certainly, than they did the week before against North Carolina. And a big part of that's Brian Stevens. But the rest around him is just not very good, if I'm just being honest. But you nailed it, Trip. This is a very blue-collar team, and they are the epitome of that. Them and their defensive ends. Those two groups, how they play is how this entire team plays. Just not the most talented, but they battle their butts off, and that is really the culture that Tony Elliott's building. If he can recruit better players, they might actually be okay because these kids are coached relatively well and they play hard for him, Trevor. They do. They play hard for that guy. There's clearly a respect there with their head coach, in my opinion. I don't see how you keep playing as hard as they do when there's really not a lot to play for if you don't kind of love being part of that team and respect the guys that you're playing for, head coach, coordinators, position coaches, and all that. And you have to give Tony Elliott a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, Virginia's just filled with they're a team filled with guys with a bunch of high motors. They are, and that's their offensive line in a nutshell. I actually wrote about the matchup of Donovan Heinisch going up against the interior of the offensive line for Virginia because it is an interesting matchup. I mean, we got a glimpse of what it was going to look like with Donovan Heinisch getting starter snaps against Florida State, but throughout the season up until Florida State,
did he good.
Sure did. I mean, he was their highest graded defensive lineman, ripped off 2 sacks. Like leaves a lot of room for promise. But I am going to be interested to see what it's like now that he is the guy. Like he's not the rotational guy that comes in. I think he's going to handle it very well. I do. But it's interesting now that he's going up against Stevens. Yeah.
And you're going to need Rubio to play a little bit more probably in this game. To be honest with you, does Mookum play a little bit more? Do you get some more beef in there with those guys? That's the interesting thing about it. But with Florida State, once they're going to start eating them a little bit, that offensive line part of the reason Notre Dame had 8 sacks is because I think that offensive line just kind of gave up, third quarter and just kind of Virginia's offensive line I don't care if you're up 31-0 at halftime. They're going to come out second half and they're going to battle you like it's nothing. That's just the way this team is. And that's the difference is you're going to have to earn, where Florida State is you just kind of out-talented them and then they kind of quit and that team just has no heart. I mean, they just don't. This Virginia team is going to battle you for 60 minutes. It doesn't matter what the score is. You're going to have to earn everything you get against them. And you should be able to get something against them because they're just not good. I mean, that's the thing, Trevor. I'm not going to try to spin it to y'all and try to convince y'all that, boy, they're a couple plays away from being 9-1 and ranked in the top. I'm not going to say that. I mean, they look. Yeah, they should have beat Maryland. That's the one game you look at and you're like, God, how did you lose that game? But look, Louisville's better than they are. Clemson's better than they are. North Carolina's better than they are. Maybe not 41-14 better than they are, but they're better than they are. And their other wins are over BC, which is a great win. Pitt's a great win for them. Wake Forest on the road, it's a good win for them. And you just look at it, Trevor, and you're like, hey, listen, this is a team that's going to battle you. They're just not talented. But if you just kind of come in hey, we're just going to roll the balls out and they're going to lay down and die. Not this team. Maybe the one you played last week, but this team is not going to roll over and die. It's really not. And your defense is going to have to be on top of its game. And if it is, they should dominate. Let's be honest about that. If the defense plays like they have the vast majority of the season, if not all season, really, this is a game that you should – the point should be really low for this offense, if we're being honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a team that has more wins on the road than they do at home. They have a belief in their head coach that, no matter what the score is, they're going to go out and play hard. And there are times where that benefits them. I mean, look at the Pittsburgh game. And if anybody watched that game, that was a really ugly game. But it was Pitt's motor and it was their consistent play. They go out every series like the scoreboard is 0-0 and their mind says, let's win this rep. Let's win this series, this play. And I think that mindset shift is what's helped them go from a 3-9 team, and now they're staring down the barrel at 5-4 and trying to become bowl eligible. So, they're a team that's going to play hard, and it's going to be a relentless motor. It's not going to be like last week where you hit them in the mouth a couple times and they're going to lay down. I think that's a good point, Brian. I think that's why Florida State allowed 8 sacks. But this Virginia team is one of those where, if you get the best of them and you get a sack in the backfield, they're not just going to say, oh, well, here we go. This is going to be the rest of the game. They're going to try to get theirs. So it's a team that you have to come ready and prepared to play for sure.
That's going to do it for the offensive breakdown, Trevor. We're going to go to the defense next. But before we do, folks, y'all know the drill. See you right there behind you. Hit that or underneath us. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Definitely do that. Helps us out, guys. I know a lot of people are talking about they're not getting notifications for the show. This is one of the things you guys can do is to make sure that you're doing that. So we get thousands of views on each show, and we only get hundreds of likes. So if you're listening and watching, hit that like for us. We'd greatly appreciate it.